In this third part of this series on ProType Titler, I want to demonstrate how text can be manipulated. A number of different effects can be applied to text blocks or individual characters within text blocks. These effects can be keyframed to create a wide variety of animated effect sequences. You'll recall from part 2 that when text is entered in the display area of the workspace, a text block is created containing that text. You can then overwrite the default text string with your own text. I'll leave it at default. I'm going to exit edit mode so that the text block is revealed. Now the text block properties appear in the left-hand pane. I briefly described these properties in part 1. I'll now go into more detail. With the Transform tab open, there are a number of parameters that affect how the text block appears. You will notice the faint circular swirl icon at the side of the parameter's name. This toggles animation on or off for that particular parameter. Let's look at the parameters in detail. The center parameter consists of a drop-down list containing 10 settings. These settings determine the text block's rotation point, which we'll get to shortly. They also define how the text box is positioned relative to its rotation point. This is best explained with a demonstration. By default, when you create a text block, it's created in the middle of the display area. The default setting for the center parameter is center baseline, which means that the 0, x and y display coordinates coincide with the middle of the text block at the baseline. You can see in the text block that there's a small circle with a ring around it. This is the rotation point of the text block. If I select another setting, near center for example, you can see that the text block is shifted to the right and slightly downwards. The rotation point is still at the 0, x and y display coordinates, but is located at the near end of the text block and in the center of that end. I'll now return the text block to its default position. There's an additional setting, Custom. This allows you to set the rotation point anywhere within the display area, but it's not necessary to select it to do that. When I click and hold the rotation point and drag it to where I want, you'll see that the setting changes to Custom. If I now change the setting, say to Center, the text block will move so that it satisfies that setting. The rotation slider simply allows the text block to be rotated around the rotation point. When using the slider, the angular range is limited to -360 to +360 degrees. However, the value input field has a range of -3600 to +3600 degrees. This range is more than adequate if you want to animate this angular movement. The offset parameters provide a means of offsetting the X and Y coordinates from the center of the display. The scale parameters affect the size of the text block in the X and Y directions. The block is scaled with reference to the rotation point. If the scale value is taken negative, the text block will reverse. The shear parameter simply slants the text block with respect to the rotation point. The slant direction is determined by the polarity of the parameter value. Before leaving the Transform tab, it's worth noting that the text block can be manipulated using its handles. Each of the handles affects the size of the text block in different ways. Adjusting the handles in the middle of the text block's sides will resize it around its center. Adjusting one of the corner handles will adjust its size from the opposite corner. When done this way, the aspect ratio is maintained. If you hold the Shift key down while dragging a corner, the aspect ratio is ignored. If you hover the mouse over the rotation point, a large circle appears. It's quite dim, so it's difficult to see. If you move the mouse onto any part of that circle, then click and hold, you can move the mouse and the text block will rotate. Now the Effects tab. To demonstrate the effects in this tab, I'm going to make some changes to the attributes of the text. I've entered Edit mode by double-clicking the text block, but you can also do this by clicking the Edit Text icon at the top of the workspace. I'll now select all the text. I want a nice chunky font, so I'll open up the font family drop-down list and select Cooper. Be aware that if you've used a font before, it will appear in the top section, but won't appear in the main section. I'll also increase the font size. Now I'll exit edit mode. The first parameter in the Effects tab is Opacity. This one's simple. The slider is at 100 by default, which is fully opaque. At 0, the text is transparent. The gradient fill parameter only becomes effective when the Enable checkbox is ticked. The color strip determines the colors of the gradient and their distribution. There are two control nodes, one at either end of the strip. You use these to change the distribution of the colors. If you click on these, a color control dialog opens up. Here you can select the color at that node. You can have as many colors in the gradient as you like. Simply double-click on the strip to create a node and select a color for that node. Repeat as necessary. To delete a node, right-click on it and choose Delete. Note that it is possible to delete an end node, but one node must remain. With the gradient fill enabled, you'll see a line within the text block. This is the on-screen control for the gradient fill parameter. The two ends of the line have nodes, which correspond to the ends of the gradient fill bar. These nodes can be repositioned to achieve exactly the effect you want. If you right-click on a node, two options appear: Reset and Delete. Reset simply reverts the gradient to the gradient fill bar setting. Delete will delete the text block, so be careful. Ctrl-Z is your friend. The Effects section, as you can see, contains three effects. The Gaussian blur effect has two parameters. These control how much blur is applied in the horizontal and vertical directions. Again, this effect needs to be enabled with the checkbox. The glow effect simply creates a glow around the characters. The slider determines the amount of glow and the colour swatch its colour. The drop shadows parameters should be familiar. They control the shadow's blur, its horizontal and vertical offset from the text, and its colour. You'll have noticed that down the right side of the panel there are 4 icons that look like 4 squares and floppy disk icons. The 4 squares icons relate to the subject of collections, which I'll be dealing with in a future tutorial. The floppy disk icons allow you to save an effect setting as a recallable preset. The Layout tab. The first parameter is a vertical orientation checkbox. Enabling this checkbox turns each character in the block 90 degrees. The tracking parameter adjusts the spacing between characters. The line spacing parameter adjusts the spacing between multiple lines of text. To show this, I need to add another line. The selection parameter is a slider that works in conjunction with the next 2 parameters, selection type and fade selection. By default, the selection type is character and the fade selection checkbox is enabled. In this mode, adjusting the selection slider progressively fades out each character. If you adjust the opposite end of the slider, the fade sequence is reversed. The selection type can also be word or line. If the fade selection checkbox is unchecked, the selection becomes transparent immediately. This feature can be useful for quickly creating an intro and outro for a lower third. You simply enable keyframing for this parameter, then use the selection bar to fade characters in until the lower third is fully visible, then fade them out until it's transparent. The path parameter is an interesting one. It enables the text block to follow a path. Enabling this creates a default shaped curved path. It's a little difficult to see, but it's coloured red and has a node at each end. It also has intermediate nodes where the path bends, but these are only visible when you hover over either end node. Dragging these nodes allows a multitude of shaped paths to be created. You can create multiple nodes by double-clicking on the path. The position on path parameter simply determines where the text sits on the path. If the wraparound checkbox is checked, adjusting the position on the path slider causes the text to wrap around at the end of the path. That's text block manipulation in detail. As I mentioned in the introduction, because text block parameters can be keyframed, many interesting textual effects can be created. Next time, I'll deal with the subject of collections. I'll also explain what those odd-looking icons do at the top of the workspace. Thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Bye for now.